Is starting now, so we are live. To let you know, by the way, this is on YouTube with live thing, so technically we're live. No one's ever came in and actually listened to us, but they technically could.
Okay.
But I just take it and then turn it into a podcast. All right, so let me do the intro, start, introduce you, and we'll go from there. Welcome everyone to another episode of Games and Education. Today I am honored to have an amazing role-playing game creator, Avery Alder, with me. She has created many games in her, and you could go check them out on her website, Brewed Without Ceremony. Games like Dream Askew, Dream Apart. She is known for Monster Hearts, a great game of teenage monsters, and The Quiet Year, and so many more games out there in the world of gaming. And she is a great game designer for games that are great with students because of the way they are designed without certain aspects and not. So I really am so happy to have you on my show. Avery, thank you for being here. Is there anything more you'd like to say about yourself before we really get into questions and things like that?
No, I think that was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. All right, so originally I had you here just to really start about one game, and I think that's a great place to start, and that is a game called The Quiet Year. And I love your game of The Quiet Year because you created, it is part role-playing game, but it's also just a map game. Care to explain a little bit? What is, it's a map game, it's a role-playing game. How would you describe what The Quiet Year is?
I would say, first of all, whenever someone tells me that the quiet, oh, sorry, I'm going to start that again. I think that whenever someone tells me that the quiet year isn't something, I tend to disagree with them. So a lot of people have told me that the quiet year isn't a board game or that it isn't a role-playing game, and I'm fine with both of those. I think the quiet year is really unique because it involves getting into a role, but it's the role of community belongingness and community decision-making. And so I tend to describe it as a map game because that's the simplest possible explanation. But really what I think is unique and special about the game is it's a game about community process told not through the eyes of individual people, but through the eyes of the land that process takes place on and through the decision points that come up.
And I love this game so much for so many different classrooms because in a history class and a language arts class, it does such a great job of demonstrating how a society works together. And on top of that, it also demonstrates so much just creativity and thinking when students just have to work together to create a world. And I love that collaboration aspect in it, that no one person is controlling the collaboration of the world. Everybody is part of this collaboration, designing this world together. And nobody's voice is even stronger than another person's.
One of the things that really matters to me about The Quiet Year is that it's a game about process, and it's a game about working through your feelings about what it means to belong to a community. And I like that it's a game where you can imagine yourself to hold sway over the community. You can imagine yourself to be speaking as the voice of the populace, but ultimately, when your turn ends and someone else's turn begins, totally has the power to say, like, okay, we're going to war. And so it reflects how in a community, you don't have to shape what everyone else does. You just have the power to like contribute, do your best to make your voice heard, raise perspectives, raise questions. And I think that we need more stories like that.
I'd agree with you. And also that really goes into the depth of collaboration. I mean, when we're teaching students, it's not I win, you're win, I'm right, you're wrong. We all just have to work together no matter what comes out. And that seems to be a main theme in The Quiet Year as a game, that you can't control what you want in society. You can only just help move it along.
That's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit over the last 2 years, just seeing the rise of a lot of neo-Nazi movements and a lot of fascist momentum in North America and beyond, and kind of sitting with sometimes powerlessness, sometimes but not really knowing how to stop um, actions that other people are doing, and not really knowing how to kind of reverse trends going on in the world. Um, and that I've seen in a lot of articles that were like, how do you do anti-fascist resistance work? A lot of articles are like, start by like connecting with an interfaith coalition or going down to a local mosque and like meeting people, right? Go to community centers and neighborhood houses and meet people. And it's very much about building relationships. And the other thing that I've seen is that in times when the the public conversation, the public discourse is swinging really hard in one direction, is to kind of shift what's called the Overton window. I've heard that phrase a lot over the last year or two, to kind of try and not necessarily have your arguments even be accepted, but be putting arguments out there that shift the framework that they're using to like determine what is an appropriate argument, right? That your job is to tug the communal sensibility of what seems appropriate to talk about and what seems like a possible intervention, to try and tug that in the direction that you want it to go. And I don't know, thinking about the quiet year, I think there's a lot of that is actually modeled in there. So it's interesting that I'm kind of encountering these ideas years later and starting to reflect on them now. But in the quiet year, similarly, you can't control what other people do or what other people. All you can control is the relationships that are being built and where discourse is, where the discourse is heading.
And I'm so amazed that you're discovering these things after you made the game, because these are just such points that I really want to bring to classrooms like that. I mean, the idea that we could have students have conversations about this and what they can learn about society from it, just thank you for even bringing this up. You've expanded it more than I've done, because I mean, to backtrack for all the audience who's never heard of the Quiet Year, and we'll definitely post articles up next to it. In the Quiet Year, you build a map, and every time you build a map, you also have to build it based on decision points. And everybody just gets a turn to decide something else that is added. Excuse me, something else that is added to the game. And then everybody else gets to react in some way to that decision, but then they also get to add decisions to it as well. So you have to work together, but you also are working towards your own ends. And as you've already heard through this conversation, everybody just gets to do what they want, and you have to really work with others or communicate with them to get your ideas across. And what I find interesting is you could have that social discourse you mentioned about neo-Nazis and everything else and the way the world is going to certain ways. But yet my students were having those discussions about a pink candy kingdom with cotton candy clouds that were fighting off dark forces in their world. Like, they had that same discussion you wanted in a magical world like that. And I guess in some way that made it easier to talk about. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, that's a thing that has come up a lot in my play of both The Quiet Year and Monster Hearts, is that for a lot of people, having like working through metaphor, having kind of different fantastical lenses, it allows people to arrive at a place of telling poignant stories that help challenge their own perspectives, circumvents a lot of their defense mechanisms. Because we don't have pre-existing biases and notions and kind of cultural imprinting about the struggles of a candy cane kingdom with fluffy pink clouds, it means that we can tell stories that really actually do, in the end, get at the same kind of human and social themes, but in a way that feels fresh and unexpected, and that we aren't guarded against. And so I think that, yeah, that kind of metaphor or fantastical lens can actually bring us closer to a lot of important truths and reflections than we might get otherwise, that we might get if we were, to play a quote unquote serious game.
That's very interesting, because I noticed the best part of this game is after they play with the students, I have them do a write up of their experience playing the game. And that experience could either be their actual experience of it, or it could be them expanding the game on how they want it in their own way and the decisions they had to make, or their own narrative of the world that they made. I've done these writing assignments with the students, and it always comes back to those points of real life in the end of it, even though that there's nowhere in the game it says this has to replicate real life in any way.
I think a big part of that is that the process of the game, right? You're sharing or you're taking turns, kind of interpreting things for the community, adding things to the map, making decisions, and turn by turn, like you have very little opportunity to weigh in on other people's decisions, which reflects the ways in which a community like you can't actually get everyone on the same page. You can't hold a consensus public town hall meeting about every single thing. It's just not really logistically possible. And so you end up having this structural model that replicates how communities always have a lot of things going on and a lot of movement in a lot of directions at once. And I think that the structure of the game ends up kind of implicitly or at like a meta level some big questions of players. And one of them is like, how do you work together with people when you don't share their values? And another is like, what does it mean to belong to a community? And what does it mean to make decisions together? And what does it mean to trust each other? Right? Does trust mean that we always talk about everything before we do it? Or does trust mean we all do our own things and we trust that we're acting in good faith? And like these are big questions that the Quiet Year never gets people to vocalize or make explicit, but it's structurally embedded into how the game plays out.
I might in the future find ways to actually get that a little more explicitly, implicitly hidden in ways to get students to talk about it after the game because I love it so much. And then one mechanic I love in the game too you have is no matter what, you do have the ability in the game to at least express your opinions through a mechanic called spite, which I love because there's a mechanic that gives you spite tokens, which actually do nothing in the game. Mechanically, they really don't do much, but everybody loves to grab them to express their discontent with what other people do in society. So it does create at least a visual aid of a community in discontent. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this mechanic you created because it seriously has no value, but students will love to grab these tokens and just show how much they are angry when another student does something.
I think that that's an interesting question about the contempt tokens is, do they have a value? And I think that in terms of like, they don't affect numerically. They don't change, the order of cards in the deck or anything like that. But I think that they are a mechanic that does have an impact on play, because I often play with little red skull tokens, and when you take a little red skull token and put it in front of you and everyone else knows that this is called a contempt token and that you're expressing the fact that you don't feel consulted or honored by your community, like I think that in and of itself is an effect. I think, but I think that there's a question there that gets back to the meta questions about what it means to be in a community and make decisions. Like, when other people are upset about the decisions you're making or the power you're claiming, does that actually matter to you? And in some communities and in some structures of government, like, it just doesn't matter. Or in even some cases, like in authoritarianism, like having a discontented populace or discontented marginalized populace is actually like part of how the structure works. And so I think that in talking about contempt tokens, whenever someone asks me, but what do they actually do once they have them? I really, they don't do anything, and I kind of work really hard to shrug and to say, like, they sit in front of you. You never spend them; they just stay there. And so what they do, like, it's really up to what people feel like they do, which I think is fundamentally different than saying they do nothing.
I will agree with you on that, and I want to take back my words after hearing that. You're right. Do nothing is the wrong way. They have no actual mechanical power in the game, but they do affect our minds, which is just blowing my own mind to think about that as a part of this game that we could talk about in deconstructing the game. Now, I could talk about Quiet Year all day, all the time, but I do have you here, and I wanted to hear more of other things you're doing right now because you have many games right now, but you also, like myself a little bit, you're working with games and education as well at the moment. What have you been doing in this space? Because I'd love to hear what others are doing about it, and so what have you been doing with games and education lately?
So I think that there's three different answers. One of which is that I've been doing sparsely some workshops. In November of 2017, I ran a workshop at Tatamagouche Center in Nova Scotia, and it was a 3-day long kind of retreat workshop that worked with a mixture of educators, service providers, youth, marginalized community members, and people in the social services sector generally. And it was called Liberatory Story and Play. And it was a look for people who had potentially never played role-playing games before at like, what are role-playing games? How can we bring them to our communities? How can we adapt them to classrooms or nonprofits or community drop-in groups? And also, where is there potential for kind of self-reflection, conflict resolution, skill building, community building, and transformation? And it was kind of we alternated between me doing kind of lecture components, doing lots of breakout conversations and round circles, and then also playing games. So throughout the weekend, Lady Blackbird, Dream Askew, A Place to Fuck Each Other, and a few other games. I don't remember the full list right now, as well as having a live demo of The Mustang by John Harper and John Harper. And so people got to experience playing games, helping co-facilitate games, and watching in on games and seeing different kind of techniques being used and different things being kind of brought out for players to explore. So that's actually leading into another workshop that I'm doing at the same center this year that's about that's more focused on hosting and running games for diverse audiences. So whether that's new players, players with kind of learning disabilities or other potential barriers to play, players from and so doing these workshops has been really wonderful. It's really exciting and interesting and strange to be running events for people who aren't gamers, for people who are like coming in because they're history teachers, for example, and learning about games for the first time as a tool set for that. So that's been really interesting. Another thing that I've been doing in terms of merging games and education is as I've been playtesting Dream Askew and developing it and getting it ready for publication, I've actually met up with a few different LGBT youth drop-in groups and run the game for them. So in Vancouver, I ran the game for a group that had people, I think 18 to 21 years old was generally the age bracket. And so I sat down and ran it for a group of 6 youth. A few weeks ago, me and my partner actually went in together to another kind of queer youth drop-in and each ran a table for 6. And that was for youth who were 13 to 18, the majority of whom were like 14, 15 years old, which was really interesting to get to like see kind of a gaggle of 14-year-olds approaching a new medium. And like some of them had played Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of them hadn't played anything like this. 1 or 2 were theater kids, but seeing them dive into this and explore it was really interesting.
Can I?
So I've been doing that.
I want to give my audience just a moment so they
Yeah.
know what Dream Askew is, because I think Dream Askew is an amazing game. I haven't played it myself yet, so I can't say I have played it. But the idea of Dream Askew is they are a queer characters in a post-apocalyptic future working together to kind of, I guess, bond together and survive the apocalypse together in this world that is well, not only destroyed but also outcasting them even more. Is that accurate? Or Where do I where
Yeah,
I want to know more about it.
yeah, it's a game about queer identity, relationships, and community. It is a game that is about weathering the apocalypse together. And in terms of how the game approaches the concept of apocalypse, sees the apocalypse not as a kind of big monumental event that changes the world all at once, but as a continual process that wave by wave hits marginalized people first, and pulls them out of society, and usually permanently. And so the kind of the setup of Dream Askew asks you to imagine that the apocalypse has been going on for a long time for a lot of people, and that you're part of a queer enclave, and that you were just hit recently. And I think that lines up with my view of like the impacts of capitalism and colonialism on the world, and the impacts of kind of imperialist violence, right? That we have undergone apocalyptic events, and that we continue to have them. And so Dream Askew is a game about banding together, forming community, finding healing and love, and trying to make the best of scarcity, as queer people in your apocalypse.
And I must know, because I hearing about that, what was the reaction to the students when they did this? How did they feel when playing this game and afterwards? What I must know about that.
It was really cool actually. A lot of them found a lot of validation and excitement in filling out their dates, because there's a lot of choices that you get to make about aesthetics and gender and what you bring to community and the ways in which you were flawed within community. And for just living on their own for the first time or still living with their parents, this is a lot of I think our story about queer culture is, but something they maybe haven't had robust and varied experiences with. So putting them in this place and saying like, here's your character sheet, like make what it means for you personally, individually, to belong to this community, and what you bring to it and what you take from it. I think was actually a really cool process for them. There's also stuff like choosing your gender, and the list has like kind of wild, either only semi-existent or not yet existent genders to be choosing from. And so people are deciding that they're an ice femme, or they're a dagger daddy, or that they're a gargoyle, and deciding what those gender possibilities mean for them. And both youth groups have just loved that. They've like shrieked and laughed with joy. It's been really exciting. Working with the younger group, the one that was a lot of 14 and 15-year-olds, there were a lot of phrases that they were kind of giggly and nervous about engaging with, and to navigate, because I think it was a moment where I was, we were sitting with these young folks and saying like this is your culture, and these are the identities that like you can navigate, and like these are ways of expressing yourself in the world that like you've been told you aren't allowed to claim, but you actually just are allowed to claim. And so seeing people work through their nervousness and excitement about getting to tell queer stories about kind of like queer issues and queer people was just really, it was really cool.
That's amazing in so many ways. I guess I would ask, because you mentioned the whole thing about being a marginalized population first and how that goes around. Could this game be applied to a classroom even if it wasn't I mean, sorry, in many classrooms it is not just queer students, there's just students of all types there. Could this game apply to them as well? Because it just sounds so great. I feel that these mechanics of it, and as you said, marginalization could be such a great lesson. Could it resonate and work well with any students, or do you believe it is more specifically for those exploring gender and queer identity? I'm curious because I haven't played it myself.
Yeah, I think that's always an interesting question, just about game design in general when you're designing games about kind of like specific experiences or marginalized experiences, is that like a lot of the people who will engage with your game or play your game are going to be, they're going to be straight people, they're going to be white people, they're going to be able-bodied people, they're going to be cisgender people, all of them, but like a lot of people. And so there's always a lot of murky gray area involved in deciding to create art or create stories about marginalized people and then turn them over to kind of majority audiences or mainstream audiences. But I think that Dream Askew holds up well. I think it requires a facilitator who feels like they can both encourage people to dive into making this story their own, but also who can kind of watch out for moments when people are falling into kind of the trap of parody or mockery, or even just blocky stereotypes and caricatures that don't develop over time. A tall order for people to ask people to sit down and play Dream Askew when it doesn't align with their own experiences. But I think it's great to to ask for tall orders of people. There's some advice in the book for Dream Askew. It's for Dream Askew as well as Dream Apart, which is a game designed by Benjamin Rosenbaum that uses the same system, but instead tells stories about a Jewish shtetl community in Eastern Europe during the early 19th century. So they're both games about marginalized community and about belonging outside belonging. And they both rely on, or they both tell stories about a real world marginalized group. And some of the advice that we included in the book for people who are playing who aren't part of that group themselves, it can be challenging to tell those stories, especially if you care about getting it right. A lot of the advice that we give is like, aiming here for perfection. We're acknowledging that everyone who comes to the table is brave for attempting to tell these stories, and that we should all start with where we're at, which sometimes means like telling stories that do turn at first to kind of stereotypes or caricatures or whatever the most obvious thing is, but that as you play, part of your task and part of your work is to challenge yourself to reach for more nuance, reach for more depth, and to challenge the kind of story that you've built so far, to kind of reach for those additional facets, those additional dimensions, and those additional stories. And I think in a mixed group, playing it in a classroom, playing it with anyone who's excited to do it is exciting. And I encourage it. And I think that if people are willing to take that plunge, that's really cool. And I guess like how you make that work, I think, is that everyone making the plunge just starts with where they're at, and they work to search for more depth as they go.
That's definitely where I would love to take this game. And I have to say, I'm now going to do as much as I can with Dream Askew and Dream Apart, because Dream Apart deals with the marginalization that might be easier for some audiences. So that's definitely a good idea as well. It's just so awesome that when Nick, you can do these things, but yet as we talked about with the same as we talked about with the Quiet Year. I don't want to get my words right for this. When you are doing something in a world that is not yours, I have found students, and I'm sure you have as well, people are much more comfortable to embrace these ideas and this way of doing things because it is a metaphor, yes, but they are not actually there. So doing a game like Dream Askew in the Apocalypse about marginalization, or Dream Apart in a Jewish shtetl, which is also great for history classes. So I look forward to that. by doing it that way, the students don't feel as I'm trying to think of the word. They feel more open to be part of this game and really embrace it.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson that um, has come to me. Or sorry, I'm going to start that reply over again. Valuable that I've heard from Jason Morningstar, especially, as well as a few other designers of games that tackle historical settings. This idea that like you should take whatever information you have and take whatever information you can access, and to like make it feel real, but also like make it your own, right? Like there's no way that you're going to perfectly recreate aesthetics and the conversational patter and the little minutia of Poland in 1931 or France in 1722, or whatever the case might be. You should do your best to capture um, detail and a feeling of realness, but like within reason. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're going to do is you're going to take what you know and make it your own and run with it.
Avery, there's so much more I'd love to talk to you about, but I want to try to keep my episodes about 30 minutes long. So I'm actually seriously saying I hope to have you on again because you've just opened up a world of how games could really open up students' ability to share and really interact with the modern world in ways they feel comfortable and learning these lessons. This can be applied to middle school, high school, in just playing the games, or actually in lessons of language arts and history to discuss about themes that we find. Uh, Thank you. That was just amazing, everything about this. And I'm so excited to run even more games now of the Quiet Year and now Dream Askew with students because of the conversation we had. Uh, Thank you for creating these games that open up those topics to people. I greatly appreciate that. And I know there's so much more I would love to talk to you about, but I kind of want to, I've now found a theme for this episode and I want to just keep it about really embracing ideas of games. And I think, if anything, you have shown students and teachers, I hope you're listening as well, how we can get students to really be something and feel something. This sounds like the way to do it. And just thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. These are really great questions, and this is a great conversation.
Yes. And if they want to find these games, where would you tell them to go? Would it be at Brewed Without Ceremony?
Site is buriedwithoutceremony.com. And I'm also on Twitter at my handle is dreamaskew. People can check out my games on my website and can kind of keep up with what I'm thinking about and talking about on Twitter.
That's great. And good luck with all your adventures in education as well. And
cool. Thank you so much.
And that's where we're going to end the episode. Avery, thank you so much for doing this with me. That was, hold on, I put my video so you can see me. That was amazing. Like, I didn't even know this conversation would go to the places it went in that episode. And I'm so happy it did. Like, hi. I did not think it would go to those places you wanted to go. And I've seriously not thought of using the games with those themes in it. It's just so much better now that I think about it. Oh my gosh.
Cool. I'm glad.
I literally have a 6th grade teacher last year that did the Quiet Year, but now this year is literally everything she is tying in her class is to, and I might actually put this in the episode, because she is literally tying everything in her class to these United Nations standards of what we hope to achieve in the world and how we get to them. And it's communication. It's, nobody goes hungry. It's these different standards. And like, those are the things that happen in the Quiet Year and your other games. And it's just really now thinking that no, that's an actual connection you can make with them was so awesome to hear.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I think that the Quiet Year does, I think, compared to even other designs of mine, like it does a good job of um, getting people to just like make the choices about a topic rather than trying to explain the topic to people,
Mm-hmm.
which leaves lots of room for kind of like self-reflection or kind of structured reflection by the teacher afterwards.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that there's that potential now.
Oh, there is. I make sure of it in the classes, and thank you. Your game is one of my staple games. I have the Quiet Year of like when I do lessons, I'm like, here, let's play this one because it's the easy gateway for teachers of a game. Uh, I love because it's now a game for teachers, and I'm like, all right, good, everything's good, and then I hear like your game. What was it? The fuck.
A place to fuck each other.
A place to fuck each other. I'm like, I just don't know if I can play those words without bleeping on my podcast. I might have to just because I'm not sure. But I'm like,
Yeah, feel free to add in some static or something.
yeah. But yeah, it's just so cool. I would love to have you later on your show to talk about everything else about how you do your uh retreats, things like that. I know you are doing, I don't know if you're still doing it, the game design and helping other game designers create their games.
Yeah, it would be great to have an episode at some point that focused on that.
Yeah, so I definitely want to have one, but it honestly, I was like, oh my God, no, we have this perfect talk about a topic here. Let's just stop the conversation there and keep it. That was such a great topic.
Perfect.
I also didn't, as I said, I do work with a lot of middle school and high school. I love Monster Hearts. Let me say it's one of my wife and I's favorite games. We've played it way too many times, and it's gotten way too inappropriate, way too quickly that I go, oh, because of how we've played it and things, as we joke, is like it is the only game that we've played a few times, and every game has ended in rape and murder. And it is like every time, and we're like, we feel like horrible people because every game we've played has ended in rape, and we have not wanted that, and it's awkward and very uncomfortable. And yet we love the game, but like it's just so dark and powerful. I'm avoiding it with students for the moment.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense. I think the Monster Hearts is like a great game to like potentially put in front of teenagers, but like in the like way of like leaving the book somewhere where someone might read it way, unless the like actively facilitating. You know, I just found that like facilitating that game in a mixed adult youth space is tricky. Yeah.
And you know, with it, like I haven't read Monster Hearts 2 yet, but I'm very curious about it because I'm so much interested to see how it. I know you made changes to it to make it more adapted to queer culture and gender fluidity and things like that. So I'm very curious to see how maybe in version 2 it's toned down some of the parts that like lead to really dark paths sometimes. I'm not sure. As I said, I haven't read it. What are your thoughts on number 2? You created it.
Yeah, I think in some ways it is, and definitely there's a chapter about negotiating boundaries and what happens when people get hurt through play, which I think is like an ethical oversight on my part in the first edition that I'm really happy to have there. Yeah, a lot of it is just like it's streamlined for new players. The writing kind of reflects a greater sensitivity that I've developed over time, and there's that chapter on boundaries and negotiating between players at a social level.
You know, because I just have this here, and you know what? I'll save it for another episode. I would love to have an episode with you know what? I think we should have it here. I would love to hear what are your thoughts now this chapter on negotiating boundaries in a game, because that's a topic I had actually with Ron Edwards. I had a whole talk with him. It started out as lines and veils, and then went to a whole discussion about that topic. What is your advice for negotiating boundaries in a game? I'd love to just hear
it. Yeah, I think my first piece of advice is that people already come into whatever game they're playing with a lifetime of kind of tools and pathways for navigating conflict and negotiating their own boundaries. And that whatever we do as game designers or game facilitators, we should be making sure that we're designing kind of tools that augment people's existing skills around negotiating boundaries, rather than kind of being like, take everything you think you know about your boundaries, throw it out the window, and use this one weird trick, right? Like I think that can be dangerous. And so a thing that I'm working to do more and more as I write games and as I facilitate games is put social tools on the table that are like, in addition to everything you already know about taking care of yourself, about talking to other people, and about saying like, hey, whoa, let's back up. This feels messed up. In addition to that, you've got this additional tool. So working to kind of like design and present tools that scaffold people's ability to negotiate boundaries rather than dictating a process for it. A lot of my thinking on the topic has been really influenced by an essay that Ben Lehman put out about a year ago at this point, about experiences as someone with PTSD playing in game communities where really like explicit procedural tools were being introduced and mandated for how to navigate conflict in games, and just how that really didn't work for Ben. And so I don't know, that essay has been really helpful and has made me think a lot more about what it means to support people. So those are my biggest thoughts.
You are now the second person who has mentioned Ben Lehman on my podcast, and I love his game Polaris, but now I think I'm going to have to find a way to get him on my show to talk about that, because that is, if you could send me this essay, I'd appreciate it. Because I don't know where to find it, or maybe it's just on his. I think I see it here. Is this Games and Disabilities? Ben Lehman's. I'm looking at this and try to find it.
I just sent it.
PTSD Gaming and the X Card. That's his essay, or there's something about that. Is that correct?
It's called PTSD: Access to Role-Playing Games and the Luxton Technique, and it was put out August 28th, 2017. And I just linked it in the chat.
Oh, thank you. That is awesome. I want to read that now. That's super cool. And as I said, it's so great that there's something like that after I just had Ron Edwards on the show, who started a lot of that talk from because he did the lines and veils, which I use with games and stuff. So can't wait to see the next generation. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get Ben on my show now. I'm gonna have to find a way to do that.
Cool.
Thank you. I appreciate everything you've been doing, and good luck with everything you're doing. And to give you an update, it's probably going to be about a month and a half, 2 months till your episode actually comes out. At this rate, I have a backlog of things going on, but I might do it on I want to get yours out there because I love all the games you're doing and I use them in my classes. But so thank you so much, and I definitely would love to have you on again.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. All right. I should run. Take care.
Bye.